The Kaimuki House. The Kaimuki House is a true story about a haunted house in Honolulu, Hawaii. The ghost that is said to haunt the house is called a kasha, a man-eating demon from Japanese folklore with an insatiable hunger for blood and corpses. There is an infamous haunted house in Honolulu, Hawaii that locals call Kaimuki House. In the summer of 1942, the house was occupied by a single mother and her 3 children. One night, the police were called to her house. They found the hysterical woman in the front yard screaming, "She's trying to kill my children." When they entered the house, the police officers stumbled onto a scene that they would never forget. The 3 children were being thrown around the room by an invisible force. The officers watched for over an hour, unable to do anything, as the children were beaten and strangled by the unseen entity. The incident was on the front page of the local newspaper headlines for several days. Years later, 3 girls were sharing the house. One night, they started to hear strange noises. It sounded like someone was moving around and talking. One of the girls felt an invisible hand on her arm. They called the police. When the officer arrived, he found the 3 girls standing outside the house with a look of sheer terror on their faces. The girls decided to go and stay with one of their mothers, and the policemen decided to follow them to make sure nothing happened. However, on the way, the police officer saw the girl's car pull over into a parking lot. The girl in the front seat was struggling with something invisible that was trying to strangle her. When the police jumped out of his car and tried to rescue the girls, he felt a strange, calloused hand grab his arm and twist it. Suddenly, the door of the vehicle flew open and the girl was thrown out onto the road. She was clawing at her throat as if someone was choking her. They were unable to do anything to stop the attack and were forced to watch as the woman was strangled to death. In 1977, a Japanese couple moved into the haunted house in Kaimuki. They didn't know anything about its history. On their first night in the place, the wife woke up at midnight because the bedroom was very cold. When she looked around, she was horrified to see a ghostly white figure floating in midair. It was a woman with no arms or legs. When the wife tried to wake her husband, the figure disappeared. The next day, the couple were so disturbed by the apparition that they contacted a priest. He advised them to make offerings of bread and water to the spirit every night. He said it was a kasha, a Japanese demon caused by some horrible murders that occurred in the house years before. After repeating the ceremony every night for a week, the couple never saw the horrific spirit in the house again. These stories are just the tip of the iceberg. They say the cause of the haunting was a series of terrible murders. Many years before, a Japanese immigrant lived in the house with his wife and 2 children. Apparently, the husband killed his wife, his son, and his daughter. He chopped up the bodies and hid them on the property. The police discovered the corpses of the wife and son buried in the garden, but the daughter's body was never found. They say her corpse is still hidden somewhere in the house. After that, the house was abandoned for many years. Later, there were 2 women who lived in the house. One of the women fell in love with a man. There was some type of love triangle, and they say the man was driven mad by jealousy. He murdered both of the women and then committed suicide in the house. The bodies of the 3 people were found inside the home after a few days. It is believed that these horrible murders were created by a kasha, a Japanese demon created by a grudge or extreme anger after a shocking murder. Today, villagers still tell stories of the terrifying occurrences, and many books and newspaper articles have been written detailing the haunting in Kaimuki House. In another story, an hour ago, dispatch received a call from the neighbors. There were shrieks coming from this house, and then a woman was hysterical in the yard. Something was in the house, they say, that was smashing furniture and attacking anyone who tried to come in. It seemed to be after her son, who, according to the officers, was floating smack dab in the middle of the room while all the fracas was going on. The officers say that the attack lasted for nearly an hour. The blood-soaked interior of the room and all the furniture had been smashed to a million bits, as if a tornado had torn into Kaimuki, had been methodically pulled apart by the arms, legs, and head before his torso was ripped in half like a gutted fish. The family that lived there before the vacancy had 2 children and a single mother. Both children were killed by this entity, ripped apart by an invisible force right before the mother's eyes, as well as the eyes of several police officers that were called to the scene due to screams and major commotion. These events are actually documented in a police report, therefore deeming this event credible.